chamber waits in ceremonial silence, the sort that turns oxygen into judgment. Cameras hover, pens rest midair, and every heartbeat seems to echo through marble. At the front, Representative Jasmine Crockett adjusts the microphone with deliberate care, a small act that feels like the opening of a case file. Across from her, Justice Clarence Thomas sits anchored by decades of authority, his stillness almost defiant. The room is too bright. The polished surface of the table reflects the overhead light like interrogation glass. Aides whisper behind stacks of paper that no one dares touch yet. Crockett scans the room. The senators, the press, the silence choreography of power disguised as procedure. She's been here before, but not like this. This isn't oversight. This is autopsy. Thomas doesn't flinch. He knows posture is persuasion. His hands remain folded, the gold ring faintly glinting with the assurance of untouchable tenure. His eyes move only once, to the clock on the far wall, as if time itself were on his side. When Crockett begins, her voice is steady, judicial in cadence. "This hearing convenes under Article 3's promise of good behavior," she says, letting the words rest, daring anyone to interrupt. The phrase hangs in the air, half oath, half accusation. The audience feels the collision of eras, a new guard confronting the marble permanence of an old one. The contrast is theatrical, but the stakes are painfully real. She isn't just questioning a man. She's questioning the myth of lifetime virtue. A soft murmur ripples through the gallery. Reporters lean forward. In this silence, power reveals its truest form, not as thunder, but as patience weaponized. By the time she lifts her next page, the room already knows the silence has ended, and the reckoning has begun. She begins with numbers, unadorned, unmerciful. 3 vacations, 2 private flights, 1 benefactor with open accounts. Her voice doesn't rise. It sharpens. Each syllable lands like a gavel on glass. The committee members shift in their seats, not because they doubt her, but because the arithmetic of misconduct has a way of sounding biblical when spoken aloud. Thomas blinks once, slow, deliberate. His silence isn't empty, it's a performance. Years on the bench have taught him that stillness can disarm more effectively than outrage. But Crockett has learned another reality. Silence can also confess. She moves through the exhibits, photographs of yachts, invoices blurred by euphemism, a handwritten thank you note signed with judicial courtesy. Her tone remains surgical, her restraint unnerving. The journalists in the gallery recognize the rhythm. This is not theater. It's prosecution disguised as inquiry. "Justice Thomas," she says evenly, "when does generosity become influence?" The inquiry hovers, rhetorical but radioactive. No one expects an answer, but the pause afterward feels like the moment before a lightning strike. Thomas clears his throat, a sound that tries to reclaim authority. "Congresswoman," he replies, his baritone steady, "association does not negate judgment." The phrase lands well enough for a headline, but poorly enough for history. Crockett tilts her head, the faintest smirk curving as if to say, "We've heard this justification before." A senator interjects, pretending at neutrality, but the balance is already lost. The audience senses it, the tremor beneath decorum. In that instant, the myth of the impartial robe begins to tear, thread by thread. Crockett leans forward, elbows on the table, eyes unblinking. "Integrity," she says softly, "isn't measured by what's legal. It's measured by what's right when no one is watching." Her words carry across marble and microphones, piercing the practiced calm like a verdict. Thomas doesn't reply. His jaw tightens, the sort of restraint that feels almost like regret. Around him, the staffers avoid eye contact, the room held in the tension of a shared revelation. That the inquiry isn't about law at all, but about trust. Faith in the robe, faith in the idea that law can still blush. And for the first time, the weight of her evidence feels heavier than his silence. The hearing isn't explosive, it's surgical, a slow incision through decades of deference. The cut is clean, the wound permanent. Thomas adjusts the microphone, a small gesture that carries the weight of centuries. He speaks slowly, as if dictating to time itself. "I have served this nation under the same oath as my predecessors," he begins, his tone carved from the marble behind him. "Precedent guides us, duty anchors us, and association, true association, cannot taint what is bound by trust." It sounds like scripture, The committee listens, half in respect, half in disbelief. The cadence of tradition is powerful. It was built to outlast dissent. But beneath his composure something trembles, a faint fatigue, a man realizing that reverence has become his final justification. Crockett studies him without blinking. She recognizes the strategy. Frame the conversation in history, not humanity. Make the critique seem like heresy. She's seen it before, from generals, from CEOs, from men who believe legacy is immunity. He continues, there are those who mistake proximity for persuasion, who think that knowing a man means owning him. I assure you, no gift could alter the law as I interpret it. His voice steadies on the last phrase, like a verdict rehearsed too often. Crockett glances at the crowd. Some nod, others stare through him, sensing that the robe no longer shields the man beneath. She lets him finish, her silence as deliberate as his rhetoric. Justice Thomas, she says finally, you invoke duty. But whose duty? Yours or the public's trust in you? The inquiry lands not as confrontation, but as mirror. For a moment his eyes drop, not in defeat but in reflection. The power dynamic flickers. Around them the air thickens with moral ambiguity. The room smells faintly of old wood and new doubt. History feels close, watching, unsure which of them will be remembered as the defender of reality. Thomas exhales, almost imperceptibly. You speak as though integrity can be audited, he says. Crockett leans forward, her reply silent, surgical. Sometimes it must be. The exchange ends there, no shouting, no climax, just two ideologies circling like boxers, who know the next punch might define the era. Tradition versus transparency. Reverence versus reform. In that silence, the nation's inquiry crystallizes. When honor hides behind ceremony, who dares call it misconduct? The hearing fractures under its own civility. The senators begin to draw their battle lines, decorum on one side, outrage on the other. Every statement now sounds like a campaign ad disguised as jurisprudence. Cameras swivel. Their nation watches as belief and bias trade microphones. A conservative voice clears his throat, invoking the sanctity of institutions. The justice has earned our respect, he says, rehearsed and reverent. We mustn't confuse disagreement with misconduct. It lands like a benediction, soft, absolving and deeply political. Across the table, a progressive counterpart fires back, his words clipped and surgical. Respect is not immunity. Ethics demand sunlight, not shadows. The line hits the air like shrapnel. The room vibrates with the collision of worlds, not left versus right, but trust versus responsibility. Crockett sits between them, unmoved. Her stillness becomes gravitational. The debate bends toward her. She knows she doesn't need to raise her voice. Reality, when timed correctly, detonates on its own. She waits through their sparring, through the legal citations and the moral evasions, until the noise itself becomes her weapon. Then she speaks, calm and lethal. It's remarkable, she says, how quickly reverence can become a shield. Her gaze sweeps the dais. We've turned the robe into armor, not for law but for power. And the longer we call it respect, the less it resembles either. A silence ripples sharp enough to be felt. One aide stops typing mid-sentence. Even the hum of the air vent seems to dim. The committee has heard outrage before, but not this surgical dissection of their complicity. Thomas's expression tightens, the faintest contraction of pride under fire. He doesn't respond, and in that choice lies his entire justification, to endure rather than engage. Yet the endurance feels brittle now, like glass under pressure. The senators retreat into talking points, fumbling for balance. One tries to steer the narrative back to decorum, another invokes judicial independence. But the illusion has cracked. Everyone in the room senses it. The robe no longer radiates sanctity, it radiates suspicion. Crockett closes her folder, the gesture final, almost ritualistic. Accountability, she says, isn't an attack on the court. It's the only thing keeping it worthy of belief. The sentence lingers. Even those who oppose her know she's right, not politically, but morally. When the gavel falls for recess, no one stands immediately. They sit in the stillness of realization that respect without responsibility isn't reverence at all. It's surrender. Outside, flashbulbs ignite like gunfire. each one capturing a fragment of a nation, deciding what it still believes in. Inside, the echo remains, silence precise, irreversible. By morning, the hearing has changed shape. What began as an ethics inquiry now feels like an excavation, every layer revealing another compromise buried beneath the marble. The committee room is colder today, though no one mentions it. Even the lights seem harsher, as if the building itself has decided to stop forgiving. An aide slips a sealed envelope across Crockett's desk before the session begins. Inside, memos, travel logs, and one email chain marked confidential. Correspondence between a billionaire donor and an intermediary tied to the court. No direct evidence, but enough suggestion to shift the air. It isn't scandal yet, but it smells like one. Crockett doesn't smile. She knows the power of restraint. She folds the papers, slides them back into the envelope, and lets the weight of their existence sit quietly in her lap. Patience, she's learned, is the sharpest weapon in politics. The session resumes. Thomas sits unmoved, a monument of composure. The senators resume their lines of questioning, carefully threading loyalty through legality. But the rhythm has broken. The story has escaped the room. Within the hour, a journalist's phone buzzes, then another. Someone, maybe a staffer, maybe a conscience, has leaked the documents. A notification blooms across the press row like wildfire. Screens light up with the words, "Influence network tied to supreme circles." No one speaks of it yet, but everyone feels it. Crockett continues as if nothing's changed. Her voice carries the same deliberate calm. Justice, she says, isn't compromised in a single act. It decays in silence. The sentence lands just as phones start vibrating beneath desks. Timing perfect. Thomas exhales slowly, the sort of breath meant to signal patience, not fear, but it reads as both. His counsel leans in, whispering. The microphones catch nothing but the static of unease. One senator demands order, another demands answers, and still another demands a break. But Crockett presses on, unshaken. If the law cannot hold its own servants accountable, she says, then it serves only itself. The cameras find her face, unflinching, lit by the soft hum of institutional panic. It's not triumph she feels, but gravity. Something larger has begun, something that won't stop at the gavel's strike. Thomas finally speaks. You are mistaking perception for proof. His tone is colder now, the authority thinning into defensiveness. Crockett doesn't answer. She simply lets the silence respond for her. Outside, social feeds explode. Hashtags multiply, pundits assemble emergency panels, and the public, hungry, wounded, begins to chew on the idea that law might be for sale. Inside, the hearing halts. Reporters are escorted out. The gavel falls, but it sounds smaller this time, not command, just containment. Crockett gathers her papers with surgical precision. Around her, power begins to panic in slow motion. The inquiry has outgrown the chamber. It now belongs to the country. She doesn't need to look back at Thomas to know the reality. The robe has been pierced. Not by accusation, but by transparency. The silence, merciless sort that doesn't need applause to be fatal. In the corners of the room, history seems to inhale. Something irreversible has begun breathing again. By the time the session reconvenes, the air feels electric, not with outrage, but with the fragile hum of a nation watching its trust flicker. The leaks have spread overnight, dissected, debated, and amplified. Every headline now carries the same silence indictment. If even the Supreme Court can be compromised, what remains sacred? Crockett arrives without fanfare. Her stride is steady, her gaze fixed on the dais like a soldier returning to the battlefield. She already knows she'll bleed in. She doesn't need to grandstand. The reality has already done the shouting. Thomas sits rigid, the lines of his face sharper in the morning light. The robe that once symbolized judgment now feels like camouflage. He adjusts it once, a reflex, not vanity, as though he can still armor himself in symbolism. But something in his stillness betrays him. The nation has seen the human beneath the marble. Crockett opens with no papers this time. Justice Thomas, she begins softly, we stand at a moment where the law must look at itself. The words are calm, almost compassionate. So I've called this association. You've called it tradition. But when influence hides behind custom, what do we call it then? He clears his throat. Misjudgment, he answers, voice low, the syllables heavy as stone. She doesn't blink. Not wrongdoing? A pause stretches, too long to be rhetorical, too short to be accidental. Not wrongdoing, he repeats, quieter now. The word misjudgment ripples through the room like a contagion. Reporters type it instantly, their fingers trembling with the recognition of a new euphemism for guilt. Crockett steps closer, her tone sharpening. Misjudgment, she echoes. That's a generous word for a nation betrayed. He looks up, finally meeting her eyes. There's defiance there, but also fatigue, the exhaustion of a man who has outlasted every scandal except the one called reality. Congresswoman, he says, I have nothing to hide. Crockett leans in slightly, voice nearly a whisper. Then why does every fact have to be dragged into daylight? The silence that follows is the sort that rearranges history. Even the stenographer's keys pause, unsure how to record it, confession or collapse. A senator attempts to intervene, to steer the conversation back to decorum, but it's too late. The pretense of impartiality has burned away. The exchange has become something else, not hearing, not trial, but reckoning. Thomas exhales, the weight of legacy pressing against his ribs. You think you're saving the court, he murmurs. You're dismantling it. Crockett shakes her head. No, I'm reminding it that it was built to serve the people, not itself. Her words don't echo, they resonate. Even those opposed to her feel the reality in their bones. She isn't destroying the institution. She's demanding it live up to its myth. The gavel strikes once, but it doesn't end anything. The sound only punctuates the void between principle and practice. Cameras capture Thomas's face, not furious, not broken, but stripped of pretense. Crockett gathers her notes, though she no longer needs them. Her last words are calm, almost mournful. Accountability isn't rebellion, it's remembrance. Outside, the world tilts again. Commentators call it confrontation. Historians will call it correction. And inside that marble room, something ancient and unspoken, the illusion of untouchable virtue, quietly dies. By evening, the story has escaped containment. Every network replays the same 12 seconds. The pause before Thomas said misjudgment, the faint tightening in his jaw. Analysts dissect it like scripture, assigning meaning to silence, to tone, to the way Crockett never blinked. On cable panels, retired judges debate constitutional ethics, while advertisers sell credibility between segments. One anchor calls it the moral trial of our time. Another just calls it theater. Either way, the nation is watching itself argue about belief. In diners, in classrooms, in the corridors of law schools, the conversation shifts from scandal to system. People are no longer asking what Thomas did. They're asking why power always thinks it can't be questioned. The court, once untouchable, now feels suddenly human and therefore vulnerable. Inside the Capitol, the committee hall sits empty. The microphones are still on, humming faintly, as though the room itself hasn't finished speaking. An aide collects the papers left behind, each one stamped evidence, though most of what matters can't be printed. The erosion of trust, the tremor of disillusionment. Crockett watches from her office window as the sun falls behind the monument line. The city glows in contradictions, ambition lit by consequence. She knows she's both hero and heretic tonight. History always hesitates before deciding which. Down the corridor, a colleague stops her. You've shaken something sacred, he says, half warning, half awe. She replies without turning. Sacred things shouldn't fear light. Outside, protesters chant for reform. Others defend the justice, waving signs that read, respect the robe. The divide isn't clean, it never is. Every movement for integrity meets its mirror in outrage. The court releases a statement by dusk. Confidence remains unshaken. The words feel rehearsed, almost ceremonial. But in the digital age, ceremony loses to momentum. Screens have become the new benches. Public opinion, the new jury. Crockett closes her laptop. The noise fades, but not the weight. She understands what she's unleashed. Not a verdict, but a reckoning that will live beyond her name. In the silence that follows, Washington exhales like a city that's seen its reflection, and isn't sure it likes what it sees. For the first time in decades, the robe no longer represents order. It represents the inquiry. Can law survive transparency? Night falls softly over the capital, washing the city in silence consequence. The crowds have thinned. The cameras have turned elsewhere, but the echo of the hearing still vibrates in the nation's bloodstream. Inside a deserted corridor, Crockett walks alone, her heels a measured metronome against marble that's heard too many promises. The fluorescent lights hum low. Her reflection moves beside her on the glass, two Jasmines, the public sentinel, and the private citizen who carries the cost. She stops before a window overlooking the mall, where the monuments stand like silent witnesses to yet another chapter of disillusionment dressed as progress. Her phone buzzes. Another message. Another opinion, another storm brewing online. She doesn't check it. Power, she's learned, is loud. Conscience is silence. And tonight, she wants the silence. Somewhere across town, Thomas dines with old allies, the conversation cautious, the laughter forced. His world hasn't collapsed, not yet. But it's cracked, and cracks in marble don't heal. Crockett exhales, a long, deliberate breath that sounds like both exhaustion and resolve. She's won nothing definitive, yet shifted everything essential. The inquiry she raised will outlive the hearing, maybe even her career. That's the nature of moral work. It rarely rewards the hand that begins it. As she leaves the building, the security guard nods, wordless but knowing. Outside, the city hums beneath its own contradictions, ambition and reform, loyalty and reality, trust and fatigue. She glances once more at the dome, its white glow against the black sky. Every empire, she murmurs, forgets it was built by fallible men. Then she walks into the night, not triumphant, not defeated, only certain, because law, she knows, doesn't end in verdicts. It ends in memory.